Many people argue that amphetamines aren't really addictive, but addiction is defined by the medical profession as the repeated, compulsive use of substance, despite any unpleasant or even life threatening consequences. So, this means that people feel that something is driving them to use that drug again and that they can't resist it, even though they know the results are going to be bad. And in the case of amphetamines, it could be argued that use is not necessarily compulsive, but a lot of the people working with problem drug users would probably agree that amphetamine users might reach a stage in which they can't manage without the drug. So some people suggest that while a lot of the forms of amphetamine are not addictive, others like methamphetamine are. So some people working in the field of drug treatment are going to argue that while one person may use a drug addictively or repeatedly and compulsively, despite their unpleasant consequences, another person might use the same drug in a non addictive way and is therefore not going to be seen as being addicted. So it's true that people seem to become addicted to some sort of drugs more than the others, like heroin, for example. It's said to be powerfully addictive. However, it could also be suggested that heroin attracts people who already behave addictively with any drug. So most heroin users are, in fact, what we call polydrug users. So this means that they're going to regularly use more than just one drug. And this is where the idea of that addictive personality comes from. It's the idea that some people become addicted to certain substances or types of behavior more easily than other people. Whenever my clients say that they have an addictive personality, I just let them know that that's not really a thing. There are some traits that are um, more common to people who become addicted to things. However, there is no one personality type. And it's more of a label. And when we use labeling, it tends to allow us or give us permission to do those things. So if I say I'm an addict, well, I'm an addict, so I'm gonna use. I'm the black sheep of my family, so I'm always gonna make these mistakes. When we subscribe to these labels, it it just kind of gives us permission to continue the behavior. So I try to get my clients out of that mindset of you don't have an addictive personality. That's not even really a thing. But experts continue to argue about all of this. And while they still don't know as much as they would like to about the nature of addiction, there is a little research on the subject, and a lot of them believe that drug addiction usually involves both psychological and a physical dependence. The first effect of amphetamine is to make the nerves in the brain produce more dopamine, and so that person feels high. It's not actually the drug that's getting them high, it's that rush of dopamine. So when we do things we really enjoy, like playing our favorite sport, laughing at something, going dancing, that, just the natural highs of daily life, our brains are going to produce a chemical called dopamine, and that's going to create these vivid, positive memories of the experience in the amygdala. And then amphetamines also trigger the production of dopamine, which acts as like a sort of a messenger, and it tells another part of the brain, which is the reward center, hey, that feels great. So when somebody takes an amphetamine, much more dopamine is going to be released than would occur on a normal basis. And this user's brain is going to feel this intense pleasure during the amphetamine rush and is soon going to begin to associate taking those amphetamines with feeling great. So taking the amphetamines quickly becomes an experience that the user is going to be eager to repeat. So when people start using amphetamines, they usually need only a small dose in order to feel the effects. But if they start to use amphetamines regularly, their bodies are going to quickly get used to functioning with the drug present. And so ever larger doses are going to be needed to get that same effect. And this is what we start to call tolerance. This tolerance can start to build up to such a degree that even dangerously high doses of the amphetamine are going to produce little effect. And then tolerance is going to fade if people stop using the drug. But too often, as this tolerance is going to build and users are going to take ever larger amounts, they're going to become so used to functioning with the drug that they become unable to function without it. So, in other words, they become dependent on the drug's effects just to get through a normal day. And then pretty soon, they no longer experience that pleasure that they associate with the amphetamines. And they find that they're taking the drug in order to relieve unpleasant withdrawal symptoms that they're going to experience when they don't take it. So, when people have to take a drug in order to face the day or even just to function, they're said to have a drug dependence. So a person can become dependent on a drug in order to sleep or maybe to eat, and this dependence is not the same thing as addiction. Some experiments with methamphetamines have shown that rats will start to self administer the drug until they die. So, what's the difference here? The difference between addiction and dependence is pretty difficult to exactly pinpoint. So, even people working in the field don't really understand why some people are defined as addicted and others are dependent. But what's clear is that people can be dependent on a range of drugs without being addicted. So, for example, people may be physically dependent on a drug to help them sleep or to relieve pain, but they're not going to continue to use that drug compulsively despite any unpleasant consequences. In fact, some doctors note that many patients who have become dependent are going to voluntarily reduce their doses in an attempt to wean themselves off the drug. That's not how an addict would behave. But some people argue that it's also possible to be addicted to something like gambling or sex or exercise without being physically dependent on it. So people's behavior is continued and compulsive, and it often has deeply unpleasant consequences, yet they're unable to stop. And some people may be addicted to gambling, but they cannot be said to be dependent on it. So, how do you know if it's becoming a habit? Many people start off using drugs as an occasional thing, perhaps when they go to parties or just on the weekends. Yet, even people who use amphetamines in this way can soon find that their use is completely out of control. So, if you think that, maybe your client is worried about their use, or maybe you're worried about someone else, or if you think that even you might be developing a dependency, think about how you might answer these questions. Do you think about taking amphetamines more and more? And these are the questions that I typically will ask like in an evaluation, but sometimes I have to re-ask these questions in treatment as well for clients to help them get a better understanding of where they're at with their use. Is it abusive level? Is it addiction level? Is it habitual? Is it social use? We have to figure these things out, and it's good for the client to know where they stand. So, doing this inventory can really help them to kind of see that. But these questions, do you think about taking amphetamines more and more? Do you find it difficult to say no if you're offered amphetamines? Do you find yourself taking or needing to take the drug more often and in larger doses to get the same effect? Do you spend more money on amphetamines than you can afford? Then I continue. Do you keep saying that you're going to stop using amphetamines, but you never do? Is your schoolwork, your job, your social life, or your relationship with your family affected by your amphetamine use? Are you tempted to take amphetamines on a weekday? Are you tempted to take amphetamines even when you're alone? So, anybody who answers yes to any of these questions is showing signs of becoming dependent, and they should really think about getting some help to cut down or stop. So, the first step is for them to obviously talk to somebody about their problems. So typically this is going to be like some sort of parent or family member, a teacher, nurse, doctor, a counselor, maybe a religious leader. In some cases, people in the early stages of dependence may be able to wean themselves off the drug without any help and support of the people. I'm sorry, um, with help and support from the people that are around them. But most people find that talking to somebody about something that's bothering them or a problem is going to help them to see things in perspective, and they're typically going to find a way to handle it if it hasn't gone to that level of addiction yet. So let's talk about withdrawal. Withdrawal symptoms occur when the body has become accustomed to receiving amphetamines and then its supply just suddenly stops. So, as we talked about, amphetamines can cause users to feel more alert, more confident, more energetic. People feel high, and if they increase the doses of amphetamine, that high may last for several days, but the higher the high, the lower the low that follows. So the body's natural stores of energy will have certainly become depleted, and users are likely going to experience a crash or sudden severe withdrawal symptoms like extreme tiredness, fatigue, depression, and so on. So it's easy to understand how amphetamine users, when they're faced with these unpleasant symptoms, they feel tempted to take another dose to avoid or relieve those. And it's this cycle of high and lows that's going to draw the users into even more heavy and more frequent use. If people who have become dependent on amphetamines, they stop taking them, then they're going to have withdrawal symptoms as their body's getting used to functioning without the drug. So this is going to include intense hunger, extreme tiredness, sometimes a need to sleep for up to like 3 days, of fatigue or loss of energy, irritability, restless sleep and nightmares, depression, and this can be really severe, nausea, palpitations, hyperventilation, fearfulness and anxiety, and a powerful craving for amphetamines. So, some amphetamine users are going to take their drugs regularly. Others might use them only occasionally, like when they go out to a dance event or when they feel they need that stimulant effect of the drug to stay awake for a long period. And these users are going to fall into this pattern of binge use. Every now and then, they're going to consume several large doses over a fairly short period, like 2 or 3 or 4 days. So, using amphetamines like this is sometimes called a speed run. Heavy users, they might inject themselves every few hours, only stopping when they've run out of the drug or they've reached that point of physical exhaustion or delirium. And delirium is this a state of mental confusion and disorientation or even the psychosis. But during this period of heavy use, these users are going to become focused on recreating that initial euphoric rush. They're going to lose interest in anything else, including food. So when people use amphetamines in this way, tolerance can start to develop pretty quickly, and that level of dependence is very high. So when people stop using the drug after the binge, they're going to experience depression, anxiety, craving, and extreme fatigue. Essentially, their high is going to be followed by a crash. Okay, so Justin, age 19, began training to be a chef when he was 17. And his dreams came true when he was offered a trainee position in a top restaurant. So Justin said, I was over the moon. I loved it. The atmosphere, the pressure, the banter among the chefs. I made lots of friends and we all helped each other out. The kitchen was really busy on the weekends, totally crazy. So some of the guys used speed to help them get through. And when I was offered some, I thought, why not? And it was great. I got lots done. I finished all the prep, got everything ready on time during service, and cleaned down the head chef's work area. He was really pleased. Soon, I was using it every weekend, and I kept taking more so I could go out after my shift. I'd be speeding for a long time, and then I'd come down and just sleep for days. I kept missing shifts because I was still asleep, or even if I did wake up, I was so wiped out I couldn't work. In the end, they fired me. I've got another kitchen job now, but it's only a diner. I'm never going to use that stuff again. It may have ruined my career for good. So, people who use more than one drug at a time, like we were saying earlier, we call them polydrug users. So, use is fairly common among amphetamine users since people often take other drugs in order to counteract those unpleasant side effects of the amphetamines. So they might take marijuana or opiates to calm them down or to help them sleep, or they may try antidepressants to help relieve that low feeling that comes after, in the down period after the amphetamine high. So taking this cocktail of drugs like this can be extremely dangerous since there's no way of knowing how the body's going to react. So in some cases, the risk of death is greatly going to be increased. And it's particularly dangerous to use amphetamines with other stimulants like ecstasy, since both these drugs are going to raise the heart rate and the blood pressure, and the risk of death through stroke or heart attack is going to be increased. So, taking amphetamines with alcohol can also increase that risk of aggressive or violent behavior, and it can also cause liver or kidney failure, both of which can be fatal. And depending on what the person takes, they also risk becoming addicted to or dependent on another substance as well as the amphetamines. So, this is an excerpt from Diane. She said, "It would have been Hannah's 18th birthday next Friday. We'd planned a surprise party at an Italian restaurant in town. She loved going out to restaurants, said it gave her a chance to dress up. We were going to take her out beforehand to buy her a new outfit. She loves clothes and she would wear anything. She was so beautiful. I still can't get my head around the fact that she'd been taking drugs. Her friends said she'd taken these drugs before. Apparently, she'd tried ecstasy a couple of times, and she'd also dabbled with speed. But this time, she took them both together. They said it was because they were going to a dance club and they wanted to be able to keep going all night. The coroner said that she died of a massive stroke. A blood vessel burst in her brain. The funeral was awful. They put her into the coffin into the ground, and I started screaming. I passed out in the end. You never think that you're going to bury your own child."